As a man, did you carry any false assumptions about manhood into your adult life, into your parenting, your marriage, dating? I mean, did you carry any false assumptions about manhood?
Yeah, I did.
Do you care to elaborate?
Yeah.
So, Bill, this is a follow-up conversation to our Biblical Masculinity that we did. Got a few questions just to ask you. I think you wrote down a few to ask me.
Yep, we
to
want
try to personalize it for those listening, and then to kind of continue chewing on this for our own growth as well.
Yeah, talk about where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, I guess I'll go first since I'm already talking. So again, we decided to, if I'm right in my thinking from our last planning sesh, I've got 3 to 5 questions. You've got 3 to 5 questions. We'll kind of go back and forth, answer them.
Right.
Following our talk on biblical masculinity. So we didn't really do what we normally do, which is kind of sit down, compare a few notes, maybe script a little bit. This is more conversational between you and I.
Right.
Okay. So my first question, as a man, did you carry any false assumptions about manhood into your adult life, into your parenting, your marriage, dating? I mean, did you carry any false assumptions about manhood?
Yeah, I did.
Do you care to elaborate?
Yeah. And
Full disclosure.
We were talking about this a little bit when you and I were handling a situation last night.
Mm.
I'm a product of the 70s.
Yes, you are.
I was born in late 60s, 67, and my childhood was the 70s and teenage years through the 80s.
Yep.
And very much a product of that mentality. And the culture was transitioning from the 40s and 50s, where it could be easily done to live on a single source of income for a family.
Sure.
And the cultural expectation was for the mom to be at home. It was mom's job to keep the house clean, take care of the kids, make them lunches for school, all of that, that stereotypical mentality. And that's kind of a mindset I just grew up with. What I expected when I started dating, that's what I expected when I first married my wife, Julie. And the Lord slowly opened my eyes and kind of peeled back the reality of none of that's in Scripture. And finishing up a great book I mentioned in our last episode, Toxic War Against Masculinity. She dives deep into how fatherhood and masculinity was done over the ages. And the big turning point, a hinge point in this was the Industrial Revolution. Okay. And I mentioned this in our episode previously that before the Industrial Revolution, family was a unit. They worked together. Dad might have stepped out of the house, turned left, gone over to the wood shop or the furnace to start building horseshoes for his customers or whatever it may be, blacksmith. And it's only after the Industrial Revolution where Dad was taken out of the house and all the responsibility was put on the woman. And the expectation was the woman would take care of the emotional well-being of the family and Dad would take care of the provision of, and that was just not that, I think it's clear in the biblical roles that's a part of our masculinity is to be providers.
Yeah, it says a man is worse than an unbeliever if he's not providing for his family. So what do we do with scriptures like that?
Well, that's exactly it. It was, you look at Proverbs 31 in the description of the woman there. She also is providing. It's not a matter of an absence. It's a matter of who has the main responsibility of, right? And before the Industrial Revolution, Dad had a great responsibility and a direct role in rearing their children in a loving and nurturing manner now that we and like we do now, expect moms to take the full responsibility of today. And today our culture is still fighting back against that shift in history, and it's balancing out a little bit now that unfortunately we're required a lot of households, you got to have two incomes. There's no way around it. And now that the next problem I see is that neither mom or dad are going to be the primary emotional caregivers at the younger ages for the kids. It's going to be the daycare worker, right? How do you vet those? Are they holding to the standards you want them to have, right? So this is kind of just the dynamic how our culture, and that's what I grew up with. So yeah, I've had some really blunt conversations with my wife about, hey, don't wait around for me to ask the dishes to be done. If you see dirty dishes, go do them, right? And honestly, I didn't get this right away because it was a big cultural shift to my thinking. And I'm sad to say it took me decades to navigate through it. But hopefully I'm doing a lot better now.
Yeah.
So when I see something that needs to be done, I don't expect her to do it, whatever it is. If it's, doing the dishes or vacuum or cleaning, if I see it needs to be done, I'll go do it.
Right.
So yeah, very much so. What about you?
Yeah, I would say, as far as carrying assumptions into manhood, adulthood, marriage, parenting, and all of that, I had similar, just underlying assumptions that I didn't think I even knew I had at the time. So coming into marriage, one of them was exactly the same as you, just that whole idea of I'm going to go to work every day and then, provide, and then we'll eventually have kids, and then she won't have to work if she doesn't want to. We'll probably just have, homeschool our children and whatnot. But reality sunk in pretty quick when we realized, we could easily live on my paycheck and her doing kind of jobs at her leisure when we were just renting an apartment. It was a heck of a lot cheaper than it is now.
Yeah, different.
But buying a house was still, when I was young married, I was 20 years old. She was 18. We'll talk about that in a minute. But that was one of the assumptions. And then looking at the house prices, it was, how do we do this, right? And then, we ended up having children, and my assumption of we were just going to be a homeschool family went out the window. Like, we didn't have any desire. Like, our minds completely changed as far as what we thought we were going to do to what we were doing. And, everything turned out okay and well, and we have a great marriage, and, God is, we're blessed. Our kids, have been, in our school system here in our community. It's been wonderful. We've had great experiences there. And we've changed our perceptions and our minds, and a lot of our viewpoints have changed over time as well. But that was one of the assumptions that I had. And I say that to say it did hurt, because I wasn't the person, I was in building construction, and I found out within a few years, I'm not going to be the guy who has his own business. I'm not going to be the guy who's like a project manager and running. It's just not could I have been a PM? Yeah, probably. I'm organized enough, and I know enough about building construction where I could probably go get a project managing job and do okay at it. But it's not what I felt I wanted to do or was even kind of created or designed to do. It wasn't in my wheelhouse.
Didn't perfectly match your skill set.
Yeah, it didn't really match my skill set as much as I thought it did when I was in it. And I found out pretty quick that you really can't make a real good living in today's world in the building trades unless you have some sort of project managing career or higher.
Right.
In fact, I worked with some locals who told one of the people I used to work with, like, you're not going to really do well unless you go out on your own. This is not the area you're just not. And it's true, because in our area, there's a lot of construction companies, and almost everyone that I know who started now owns their own business to some degree to get things, or they're supplementing by doing side jobs. And so it was one of those things where, as a man, I realized our culture is shifting. And for men, we are created to provide and to go out and to work and and that's part of what we're created to do. And I think when you take away that and you say, hey, you can't just have a job and then like your wife have the option of working and doing that, it actually hurts, I think, a man's mindset. Not that, and I'm not the guy who believes every family should be that way. I mean, there's some where the woman has a great job and the Lord's providing that way, and he's a stay-at-home dad. I got no problem with that as long as he's contributing and really is rearing the children, really is. I've got no problem with the flip-flop of roles, don't get me wrong. But I think there is that sense in which I'm a little bit old school in my thinking there. So that was kind of a wake up, like, hey, this is just an assumption you had coming into, because it was my experience. I grew up as a homeschooled kid. My mom was at home, my dad was at work. So yeah, similar. But also I think another one that I had, because I was young, I was 20 years old, she was 18. That marriage was going to be not easy, not, all cupcakes and puppy dogs, rainbows and unicorns.
Right.
But I had assumptions of how the marriage relationship was going to work and was going to play out. And, everything from our time together to our sex life to our life of intimacy, which is all connected, right? Which I figured out, intimacy is not just in the bedroom. Like it's So, but there was assumptions I had. I was taught really well. I learned it all in theory, but I still carried some of those assumptions into my my marriage as a man. And so, we talked a lot our last episode about sacrificing and about being the first to forgive and all that. So I had to learn kind of the school of hard knocks on a few of those things, even though I had all the information intellectually, because I did premarital counseling and, there was some things that I learned. But yeah, so those are just some of the assumptions that I had coming into it.
I'm really concerned with the future in regards to the role of provision that's predominantly on men and not men alone. Like I said, we're in an age where you pretty much need two incomes unless you really can practice saying no to your kids a lot about what we can buy and not buy. I mean, it's possible. You and I know of a couple that are doing it.
Sure.
You
can do it.
It can be done, but it's very difficult. But now I'm seeing a trend as my kids have finished school and their friends have finished school, that it's not only you're going to need two incomes between, a husband and a wife, you're going to need to have a side hustle as well to be able to make ends meet.
It's going in that direction.
It's going in that direction. And it's going to be difficult. And I don't see it turning around from that direction going forward.
Yeah. No, it's a tough one. So did you have one to bring to the table, a question?
Well, I got 6 or 7, but
go ahead.
I'll limit.
Do another one.
So is there right or wrong? Is there something that happens in society, in culture, in family, in church, wherever, that you feel kind of undercuts your identity as a biblical man?
So is it like a personal, affects me personally or just in general?
Both, actually. I prefer it personal, but general as well. I think there's that stuff out there that affects a lot of men. But let's start with you personally.
Okay, so ask the question one more time as I process.
Is there something in our culture, society, in church, in life, that you feel undercuts your identity, your role as a man, biblical masculinity?
Only if I allow it to.
Okay.
I think the woke agenda is one of them. It has a way of destroying biblical manhood. We could talk all day about that. But as far as me personally, I think it's only what I let undercut, because I have a very supportive wife. And because I married well, and she's kind of my champion as far as my manhood's concerned, I don't necessarily struggle with my identity, like who I am as a man in Christ.
You also had a great upbringing with your dad.
I had a great upbringing. I know exactly what it means to be a man. I know exactly how far I fall short of that from time to time. So I don't think there's anything that really personally serves to undercut me, other than when I bump into people who, there is in a way a lack of respect for men in general that I'm seeing. And sometimes that's self-inflicted. A lot of times that is because a man has accepted passivity and has not accepted responsibility, and therefore his partner, his wife, or society or his workplace or whatever has substituted for him. And so when I rub elbows with that, that's hard because you're trying to speak into someone's life and encourage them when they've taken that fall, that road of passivity. But yeah, I don't think there's anything that I can think of off the top of my head that's undercut how I live and breathe as a man.
Okay.
Except for that which I bump into, in society.
I agree with you. I think the woke agenda has really robbed the identity of a healthy...
Well, both men and women.
And women, absolutely. But our topic today is the masculinity, but that's a good call out. It's both. But I think for me personally, and this is a bit of a pride issue for me,
sure,
is wanting to be the provider, just like my dad was the provider.
Sure. Yeah.
There was a season where my mom had to take part-time jobs here and there because they lived on a very tight budget. And I'm just trying to live up to the role model I saw. It's what I thought was you're supposed to do, and if you couldn't do that, you failed. And as I went through this transition of we're getting married and we can't live on one income, we can't even buy a house on one income. But particularly, there were seasons in my life where I was laid off. And there was one time which I mentioned before on this podcast, that both my wife and I got laid off at the same time. She's a school teacher. She knew that by the end of the school year, she was done. But she had an interview and lined up another position before the start of the next school year. So her income didn't really stop. Mine did. I was unemployed for several months.
Sure.
And then I got a part-time work at a tech company, which eventually led to full-time at that tech company. But in the meantime, we're short our budget every month for like 6 to 8 months. We were missing. And even then, after I got my new full-time job, we were still short of our budget for a couple of years until I got promoted. And then, okay, now finally I can pay my bills all by myself like a big boy.
Yeah.
And praise God, God used that to grow my humility.
Oh, sure.
And my correct identity in my relationship with my wife.
Yeah.
And how we should be operating as a team.
Yeah.
Not big macho me coming in, be the hero, save the day all the time, and be the provider. God used my parents in this way. They went from living to paycheck to building their finances, to being successful, to storing up and saving for retirement, doing very well. Now that my dad's been retired, and turns 87 here at the end of this month. And he's still living well and comfortably on what he built. So he would send us, a little money every month to make he said, Bill, what's the difference? What do you need? And I said, right now it's this until I can get full-time work. And then once I got full-time work, I said, Dad, I got this job offer, but it's not going to bring me up where I need to be. We may have to sell the house. And my dad grew up in foster care, which is a long story. But he grew up in foster care and really didn't have that solid. He had good people, very nice people. He didn't have any of those horror story foster care stories you may hear or see on TV or movies or things like that. Nothing like that. But it gave him the drive to make sure that he wanted to take care of his family in a way that was never done for him. And that extends to my sister and I, his two children, and his grandkids, my children and my sister's children. So he said, Bill, you got a full-time job now. I'm going to continue helping me. What's the difference now that you have full-time, and work towards that promotion? And he just stepped up, and he did that because he wanted to do it. And even though I was praising God, we got to keep a house, stay where we are, thankful for his provision, there was still a little arrow shot into my pride that I couldn't do that in of myself. And that's where God really taught me, Bill, you just got to walk humbly. Grow where you're planted and accept what I'm giving you, how I decide to give it to you. I could easily decide to give it to you another way, by a better job. But this is where I want you right now. So you grow through these things in your life I want you to grow through. And which I did. There was a point of complete surrender. And where just a few months after my complete surrender, I got promoted and now could fulfill our own budget, just my wife and I and our two incomes. So yeah, there was that experience that really undercut, made me feel like I was losing my manhood for a while.
Yeah, I mean,
not correctly, not biblically, but that was my internal struggle.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I'm thinking back over my time as you're talking as well. I had a couple of similar things, so I understand now probably the premise of the question.
Okay.
There was a couple times I remember working for my dad for like 2 weeks because we didn't have work in the construction company that I was with. And you experience those, but it was never like, oh, you're not a man now, or it was more of, oh, this is more of a burden on my wife, more of a burden on our home and our household. And it didn't feel good, but I didn't question, my manhood or things like that because I knew what I needed to do. And like I said, I married well. And so she was just encouraging me to, well, what's next?
Yeah.
I think this would have been a lot harder. And I keep saying marrying well, and this is what I mean by that. I married Al because one of the big reasons is she was a hard worker. She was a go-getter. When she wanted something, she would put her feet to the ground and she would go and get it. And by her own admission, it's not because she's the smartest person in the room. It's not because she, was some sort of, straight A kid in high school. In fact, she was the summa cum laude when she graduated college, but that was due to pure effort, right? And she knew when she looks back at high school and she's like, man, I probably should have. And I said, yeah, we all should have. You know what I mean? And she got good grades and she was the band, the head drum major of her band, 100-something kids. They won gold for state, marching band competitions her junior and her senior year. I just saw so much drive in her. And so, when we would go through those seasons, this would have been a lot different had I had married someone who wanted to or desired to be a stay-at-home mom or, wasn't wired for, a full-time job, but was more of a supplemental type of mindset and wanted to be with the kids. Luckily for Al and I got into ministry when our children were born, right when Ada was born, my oldest. So I was able to be home with my kids in the mornings while she works some mom hours, and then I went to work in the afternoon. And then because of her drive, she just kept going with her career, kept working at it, certifications and all this kind of stuff. And now she's at a point where it's almost like flip-flop because she does what she does. I can do what I do now. So we just saw this whole journey that happened together. And there were moments of like, man, I feel like I need to be out there and providing, and that assumption would pop up in your mind again. Well, that's not how God's providing for you currently. I was like, oh, okay. So I have to walk this road for a couple more weeks and then something else would come up. And so I understand where that question is. But again, for me, the manhood part of it, I just knew you're not a man because you're out of a job for a few weeks, but it does hurt that you're not the sole, provider.
Well, there was
in that way, or you couldn't be in this moment.
There was a stage where my wife wanted to be a homemaker. She didn't want to necessarily have to. And we made the difficult decision that when the kids were home before they start school, that we would live on one income. Because we discovered through research and reading that that's when their character and their personality has the greatest formation.
100%.
And having her home to be the core influence of that was a big sacrifice. But once we got past that stage, we needed her. We were frankly living with my parents during that time because a whole nother story to talk about my ministry journey of going into youth ministry and leaving it. So we were living with my parents at that time, and she was taking care of the kids. And she's like, I just wish I could do this. So, and that she never complained. She never brought that up again. And, but that memory stuck with me. Yeah. And maybe that's my feeding my own fire the wrong way.
It could be.
By bringing that memory coming back over and over. Didn't help.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I just look back at my journey so far, and I'm like, man, we were so blessed. I mean, like I said, the church, being vocational minister, allowed me that freedom to not have to do daycare or anything like that. So I owe a lot to the Lord and to the church, for that. Being able to do the second shift type of job.
yeah,
And we could still come together, for dinner times and things like that when I wasn't at the church. It was hard. I'm not going to say it wasn't hard, but we were willing to sacrifice, so that we didn't have to do that. And I think that was a big part of our kids growing up. And I bought my first home shortly into our marriage from my grandfather. And no, I didn't get some sort of brother-in-law, grandfather deal. We paid for the house. I also bought the tractor and the snowblower and kind of rolled that into the mortgage, type of a thing. So I bought some of the equipment from him as well. We've since sold that house, but it had an apartment on it. So my grandparents lived with us in the apartment. We kind of like switched spaces. We were renting from them, and then they eventually rented from us. And that allowed us to have, my kids have memories of just going over there from the time they could walk. They would be like, oh, there they go. And they'd go over to their door and knock on the door, and Grandma would let them in. And they spent much time with my grandparents, growing up as well. So my grandfather since passed. My grandmother actually lives across the street from us still. But that's another one of those provisions that you see from the Lord when you look back on your journey of how like my kids were able to grow up. But yeah, as far as your question, we did go through those seasons where, I would ask my lady, well, what if you wanted to stay home? Like, just to ask her to see where she was in her thinking. And she was like, I couldn't do that. Like my mind has to be, I got to be
engaged.
She's engaged and driven and not a busybody by any stretch of the imagination, but
she just likes to be challenged.
Yeah, she does. She likes to be challenged. She likes to have something in front of her to accomplish and, work wise. And we've just made great connections with our kids being in the school system and things like that. So it's been quite the journey. But you do and you will struggle with those for sure. It's a great question. All right, my question.
Your turn. Yeah.
My turn. What's been your toughest learning experience as a man? Your toughest learning experience as a man? Was it one of the challenges you mentioned? Was it something else?
Overcoming passivity.
Yeah, okay.
And there are a couple of events in my life that really taught me what hard work really was and that I was capable of it.
Okay.
I'm a proud card-carrying member of Introverts R Us.
Yep.
But I can tend to allow that to be a dominant influence rather than, hey, I'm called to love the Lord God with all my heart, soul, mind, strength, and my neighbor as myself. And as you know, ministry requires being around other people.
Sure. Yeah, sure.
So, but I grew up being bullied a lot, so that made me even more reserved. I would have a close knit of friends, and I would do things with them only. I would be very, very reserved about being out in large groups. And then I felt God calling me into youth ministry. And again, I'll tell the full story maybe in another episode. But I went from one church after another that literally stabbed me in the back.
Yeah, I remember that.
You know my story. You've heard it a couple times.
For sure.
So I left ministry, distrusting people more than ever. I trusted a person on the street more than a person who sat in the pew. I still believed God. I still trusted God, but I didn't want anything to do with his children. And so that just kind of compounded my drive to overcome passivity. But there were, like I said, two events. When I graduated high school and I was getting ready to go to college, I was looking for summer work so I could earn money to have my own spending money while at school. Very great situation where my parents, and at the time his employer covered 50% of my school tuition, and my dad took care of the rest through loans and scholarships and such. You don't see that happening anymore around these days anymore. At least I'm not aware of. So I earned my own money, and I heard word of mouth. A friend of mine and my future brother-in-law got a job for a landscaper tree surgeon. And I said, well, I know people there. I'll go try that out. I lost 40 pounds in 2 months.
Wow.
I never knew what hard work was. Raking, cutting down trees, carrying logs, using chainsaws. It was hard manual labor. And every day I wanted to quit. But I didn't, because it was really good pay. He paid really well. And by the end of the summer, I was walking down the mall nearby our home and ran into an old classmate, and her eyes literally bulged because I was pretty much overweight all through high school. And she's like, what happened to you? You look fantastic. You've been exercising. And I said, no, I just got a job with a landscaper. I mean, that's...
Learn what real work is.
And learn what real work is. But since that point, whenever I've had to do work around the house, like I bought a half-ton load of loam or bark mulch, and I make it disappear in 2 to 3 days, my neighbors go, how'd you do that so quickly? I said, I didn't do it very quickly. I was really slow. I just came out, an hour a day and picked at it.
Right.
So I just learned and adopted a sense of hard work mentality as a result.
Sure.
But there was still an internal drive and motivation. And then being promoted at work, I work in the call center industry. Been in there 26 years or so now. Went from phone advisor to manager. In my transition from phone advisor to manager, there were certain tasks we were required to do in coaching advisors to help improve their performance. Sure. Listen to their calls, write up evaluations on them, give them feedback, meet with them regularly to provide coaching. And you had to meet with everybody and do so many call evaluations and attend so many different meetings. So before I was promoted full-time, I would, through their leadership training program, go over and take over a team when a manager was off on vacation or leave of absence. And there was this one time this manager told me, I said, I did these things, but I haven't recorded them yet. And if it's not recorded, it didn't happen.
Right, it's not done.
So I said, but I'll do that before I leave. Well, she didn't. So, and she said, if there's any problems, text me, call me, whatever. I said, I texted her several times. I called her a couple of times. She never responded. I said, you said you did these, but I don't see this documented yet, what have you. And that's kind of where a flip switch or in my mentality, was just changed, where I said, I need to make this happen. And for some reason, God used that to say, Bill, you're responsible. She's not. You're covering the team. It's going to come down to you. You can't pass the buck.
Right.
I said, okay. So I went and met and did all those tasks she said she did, met with the people she said she met with, and then documented our conversation so it was in the system correctly. And that was just a hinge point for me saying, I need to be prepared to do what I need to do first and front. And that's, as you talked about, you reject passivity and accept responsibility.
Sure.
So, but not only did that help me accept responsibility, but that set a fire in me of being able to, and the ability to, and making it a habit, not just a one-time occasion where I make things happen. That's who Bill McGonigal now is. He's somebody who makes things happen. And that has saved me and been such a help to me. And as you know, like going to the gym, the more time you spend there, the more physically fit you have. That has helped me become more mentally and emotionally fit, adopting that mindset.
Interesting.
So those are two things that really...
Some tough lessons you learned.
Tough lessons. And I needed them because I was really, all I wanted to be a hobbit and live the Shire and ignore the rest of the world. But God said, no, I got people I need you to interact and minister to at work, at church, and other places. So get your butt in gear.
Yeah, no
No.
kidding.
So what about yourself?
Self-sacrifice is the toughest lesson I learned so far, which seems weird because I grew up in ministry. Ministry is all I know. And so I learned how to serve people at a very young age. And that's all I've been doing since. So to say self-sacrifice was the hardest lesson kind of seems like an oxymoron, but it was. I think for me, it was in the context of marriage. Coming into my marriage, some of those things I mentioned, you just had expectations. Like for me, I just had expectations of how things were going to play out. And I had to learn the lesson of husbands, love your wives as Christ loves the church. I had to learn that lesson, as most of us do, in real time within a marriage context, and then having children. And the challenge that happens every day to put my wife and my kids before myself, it's hard. I mean, I'm an extrovert. I love people, but my home has become my safe place where I can just go and shut everything off. But I can't go and shut everything off because my family's my first ministry. So as much as I love, coaching my younger, in softball and like today I'm going to be driving up over an hour trip up north to see my daughter run track, things like that. Love doing all that stuff. In the area of my relationship with my wife, learning what self-sacrifice is, that was a tough lesson for me. It's so easy to be like, well, why isn't she acting this way? Or why doesn't she respond this way? And I won't get into details because, that's personal for me and Al, but those are some of the lessons. You can fill in whatever blanks you want. You'll probably be correct because I struggle with all of it, a lot of that. But I've grown a lot, which I'm thankful for. And again, I married well, so there was grace there, and there was, she would often say things like she needed to say, and she helped me learn that lesson. So I'm eternally grateful for her in that way. But self-sacrifice is hard. And then now that I've kind of learned that lesson, I can identify when it's happening.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's self-serving. Can't do that. I can't have that attitude. So I've learned, as you said, there's like this flip of the switch that I need to go over and switch that off again, or turn on the self-sacrificing, or whatever it is. Or this is my putting Al first switch, or putting the girls first switch, however you want to put that into imagery. That's the toughest lesson I've learned so far, because it took me so dang long to learn it. Embarrassingly to say.
Same. There's lessons that I've known and I've practiced for decades, and I don't overcome them in a night, in a week, or a month. But I grow progressively better over the years. Yeah. And that's working out your salvation.
Oh, growth, not perfection, is the key. So,
and like you said, it really helped that you and both and I married up.
I married way out of my league.
I told my wife once, if you ever leave me, I'm going with you because I can't handle this myself. So,
people tell me if Al was no longer with us, you would remarry. You can't be alone. I'm like, the heck I can't. I'm never going to find someone like her again. So,
yeah.
Anyway,
same.
Next question.
My turn, I think.
Your turn, yeah.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit in regards to ministry.
Oh, shoot, we're out of time. No, just kidding.
So sometimes some of the greatest joys for me is being the audience and watching people grow into the giftedness that God has made them.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
You and your responsibilities with family ministry. We talked about nominal Christians in our last episode of masculinity.
Yeah, we did.
And how nominal Christians are some of the worst when it comes to
divorce rates and things like that,
and
nominal being people who claim they're like Christian by association.
Christian by association, they're not really here. They know some of the words.
Hearers of the words, not doers.
I grew up calling them C&E Christians. Christmas and Easter. Yeah. They'd show up twice a year, and that was it. And they were kind of culturally Christians, is another phrase, right? But I think we have a whole spectrum of men in the church who are kind of nominal to growing into being more devoted. So my question is this: How would you approach ministering to them and helping them grow more and more into that biblically definition of masculinity? Do you have a particular, I know you have the formula for a modern day knight, but do you have any other best practices in helping other men become biblical men?
Yeah, get out of the church and go where they are. 100%.
Elaborate on it.
Well, what I mean by that is for the longest time, the church, up until this cultural crisis that we've been talking about two families having to work, men would show up. They'd be Bible studies, home groups, they'd volunteer to do work days at the church. There was a lot of opportunity to interact with men back in the day. Men's breakfast on Saturday, they'd stay after church on Sunday, they'd grill. Luckily here at Jaffrey, we do have a handful of that.
We do.
Which is wonderful. We have people that are very involved. But it's not necessarily the norm anymore. No. And for a long time, I resented men for that. I'm like, get your butt in gear, get your family to church on a Sunday, stop being passive, until I started experiencing it myself. Meaning, I have friends and family whom I love dearly. They're not in church every Sunday, and I do not hold that against them. Why? 2 reasons. One, both of them are working full-time jobs. Or one of them's working full-time, the other one is home with 6 or 7 kids, doing her best to homeschool and rear godly children while still being involved in her community. People will say, oh, we did the same thing years ago. Yeah, but it was a lot easier to live on one income years ago.
Time.
Okay, I'm just saying it like it is. And you can disagree, that's fine, whatever. So what I mean by that is, for me, the connections outside the 4 walls of the church are that much more important. Like, I love it when I'm driving down the road and I'll see my buddy Matt working on a building project. I'll pull in and I'll run over. Hey, what's going on? I'll give him a hug and we'll talk. Like the last time I did that, he was working right down the street from my house, putting in a window and a door unit for another friend of ours. And we talked for like 30, 40 minutes. I probably took away his profit by talking to him, but he just lit up and he's talking about life and raising kids and his son and his daughter. And that's where discipleship happens now. Yeah. You got to be able to get outside the 4 walls of the church and go get involved and go where people are. Go to their kids' games, and go sit with them in the stands and have conversations with them and cheer their kids on. And we can't, as pastors, as elders, even as friends anymore, expect to just meet at church. And I hold nothing against the families who, the second part of this reason, this is a selfish reason, but I don't care. We live in the Northeast. Yeah. And I kid you not, for those of you who don't live up here, we get maybe 3-4 solid good months where we can be outside. So we have families who'll do like the seasonal camping. They'll be gone all summer. God bless you. Like you work your tail off. You bless people with your business. You love your family. You love the Lord. You give to the church. If you want to take a few months and go camping, why would I look down or be upset about that as a pastor because you're not in church on Sunday?
Right.
These are the people who made this church what it is. So, though my perspective has changed a little bit. So your question, state it again so I can...
No, I mean, it's about addressing nominal Christians and moving them to biblical masculinity.
It's discipleship outside the church. Yeah. I think it's a big part of that.
Yeah.
Because you can't just expect them to come in.
Being outside meaning a Bible study at the church or a church service at the church.
Yeah.
It's interacting with each other.
Right. It's those personal walking with people through life outside the physical walls of the church.
Right. Yeah. I agree 100%. And my answer is very similar. And this is a little bit maybe where my personality comes through, being more of an introvert. I love mentoring one-on-one. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I'm up to 4 people at work now I'm mentoring on a either weekly or biweekly basis.
Sure.
So I try to grab a man from church every once in a while. Hey, let's meet for breakfast. Let's sit down for coffee. Yep. Let's
100%.
Hey, this is just no problems, no concern. I'm not trying to bring anything. I don't have any agenda. I just want to get to know you a little bit better and how life's treating you. That's it. Yeah. And by the end of that, how can I pray for you?
Exactly.
Right? What's your greatest struggle and how can I be praying for you around it? Just so they know that there's someone there that cares, another man that cares about them. And we've talked about this before. We need to be looking, it takes a man to make a man.
Sure.
And we need to be looking for men ourselves to be under, to learn 100%. From.
We've talked about that, yeah.
But we also need to be looking for men who are a few years behind us.
Mentor and a mentee.
that we can pour our lives into, and the lessons that, it's Paul, it says, follow me as I follow Christ, right? And that's just a continuing extension of that.
100%.
So I think to overcome the challenge of the nominal Christians, it's going to take us as the biblical men stepping out and saying, hey, let's get together. Let's have that breakfast, that coffee. How's your business going? How's things with the wife and kids? What's your next vacation? What's your big dream?
And men too, this is another thing that's been on my radar, and I'm not the first to identify this. There's books written about this too, but podcasts. But there's a lot of good sense in which a lot of our church services are very, they're not masculine.
No.
Right? So let's face it, not manly men, and this is just,
Well, historically, predominantly the greatest attenders of church are women.
Yeah, I mean, going to church and the way that a lot of church is done is not extremely exciting for a man. Most men are doers.
Yes.
Like if I called probably 4 to 6 guys I know right now and said, hey, I need you to skip out of the church service early because I need you to fire up the girls because they would light up and they'd be like, oh, 100%, we're doing a barbecue. They want to serve. They want to do something. Or if I said, hey, we're not going to go to church this week, we're going to go put a roof on Miss Jones's house down the street, they're going to be there with their nail bags on. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But for a long time, again, my perception is, well, you got to be why do we need to be in the church service every single Sunday? Again, you're opening up a can of worms. You know my heart with church ministry.
Go for it.
Maybe someday I'll share most of it. But part of my heart is there's this time on Sunday mornings where that's our opportunity now in the culture to be together is on Sunday morning. And I don't think it always needs to look like a song, a welcome and prayer, 2 or 3 more songs, greeting time, the sermon, and then some fellowship time, which half the people go home before.
Yeah.
We got to be able to be flexible with that. Get together and one Sunday, we're just going to meet outside. We're going to have the breakfast going. We're just going to have fellowship. Pastor's going to give a short devo. We're going to play with the kids in the yard. Like there needs to be more stuff like that, I think, because that's the time when most of 90% of your church is together on a Sunday.
Yeah.
And I don't think it needs to be as structured as we have had it for so many years. And people will bark and they'll say, don't break something don't fix something that's not broken. I get it. My formula, my ideas are not for every church in every area. This is just my heart and what I'm seeing. And I think that would help serve some of this nominal. We're expecting the people just to come and sit, and I'm going to be honest with you, and not fall asleep. And I'm not talking about switching your service so you have smoke shows and lights and entertaining.
No.
I'm talking about going deeper and richer and engaging people.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different.
Well, that kind of ministers to directly the result of the Industrial Revolution, right? Mm-hmm. Creating opportunities for families to interact together as families. Right. They have 2 incomes. They're homeless. Why as churches are we not creating, why is it youth ministry? Why is it not family ministry? Mm-hmm. Right? I think there's opportunities to help build and foster it for sure. Why don't we have breakfast together in the sanctuary, pray together, sing 1 or 2 songs together, short devo, and continue the fellowship? Or why don't we not meet at church for a Sunday and let's go do that project down the street for the town to share. We care about our home.
That's church.
That's church. Yeah.
I think too, one of the things that we do here at our church once a year, we're actually coming up on it pretty quick, is our church camp out. Yep. So we have a local camp a couple towns over that allows us to use the space on a lake. And we just get there Friday evening and we tent or we stay in cabins or we bring campers. And we're at the whole facility through our Sunday service, have a baptism Sunday afternoon, and then we're done. That's one of the best memory makers, best connection times for our church body. And I think things like that need to happen more often for church. I think that would engage people to go. We're able to have conversations around campfires. And what we're expecting is for families who are now doing more and people say, oh, they're too busy for their own good. There is some of that is true.
Yes.
There are some families who you've done this to yourself. And I won't get into that because I don't want people thinking I'm talking about them, but you kind of know who you are. There's some of you that are so busy because you've done it to yourself. There's others who are busy because of life. the way life is done today in our culture, it's busy.
Circumstances outside their control.
Outside your control. You're trying to make money for the family. Your wife's going to work. One of your kids is chipping in because he's still at home, but he's got a job. I mean, it's a real deal. So to expect them to come out on a different day for another program or another home group,
big ask.
The church has to ask themselves, how realistic is that? And why not can we use Sunday morning as a time for refreshment and engaging and connection, and not just teaching and physical worship?
Yeah.
So
food for thought. And there's nowhere in Scripture it says this is the order of a church service.
Right. We just always go back to Acts and these are the four courts of the church. Yes, they are, but it doesn't tell you how to do them.
Right.
Or how often to do them.
Right.
So,
breaking of bread, fellowship, reading of the word, prayer, in Acts,
100%.
Yeah. How we do any of those things, we have freedom.
Yeah. So again, I think that ties all of that we just took a massive rabbit trail, is a rabbit trail in and of itself, but it's a rabbit trail that I think is connected with biblical masculinity.
Yeah, agree.
Because I think that men are looking for those connections. They're looking for those opportunities to serve, to just be together and, not have to sit. Whatever. Next question.
Whose turn? I think
it's mine.
Your turn.
I don't know how long we've been going.
Yeah,
But
let's make this the last one.
Okay. Last question. If Bill McGonigal could give one piece of solid advice for a younger man, what would that piece of advice be?
Ooh.
You only got one thing you can tell him. You're at a gas station. You met someone. You got one piece of advice you can give this young man. You heard a little bit about his life story. I know that could be tailored differently depending on what he shares, but what's your go-to piece of advice?
That's a good question. And it's narrowing it down to just one or two, or just one. I think if I had to pick one, would be what I call the lesson of Dr. Strange.
Okay.
So for those Marvel fans out there, Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Doctor Strange, yeah.
And the first movie, Doctor Strange, his mentor was dying. He in the hospital fighting for her life. And forgive me, Christians, it's the movie, it's what happened. She, in her astral form, leaves her body and steps out to the balcony and is watching lightning from a storm just because she slowed time down. Is just slowly watching this lightning bolt come down. And he goes out in his astral form and they have a conversation. And she's challenging him on that he hasn't learned the greatest lesson yet. And that is, it's not about you. I like how John Maxwell puts it. He says, there are a lot more others out there than there are you. So it seems like if all you're doing is focusing on you, what you want, your house, your dream car, your whatever, your picture of life, that's about you. But when you make your life about others, your universe opens up exponentially. So life is about a life of service. It's not about me, me, me. And that's the internal battle we fight from our sinful nature. No one had to teach me to hide my broccoli in my napkin from my parents, right? No one needed to teach me how to lie to cover my shame for when I did wrong, right? That's our sinful nature.
Yes, it is.
That is ingrained into us from birth as a result of Adam and Eve's fall.
So good.
So learning that and learning to, one, surrender spiritually to the work of Christ, but two, to work out our salvation. It's our work.
It's our work, yeah.
Period. And we need to grow our self-discipline. God's given us through the power of the Holy Spirit. He put the gas in the tank. We now have the ability to get it done. We still have to turn the car on and start driving it down the road. So, the lesson of Dr. Strange.
That's a good one.
What about you?
Yeah, mine is, it's funny. There are so many quotes and different things I could go to for this would be my one piece of advice. But yeah. Mine was very similar. My first thought when I was actually answering this question, not listening to you as well as I should have,
Thanks for the honesty.
No, it's true. I'm like, how am I going to answer this? I didn't even think about my own answer. It's learning the art of service for me. Similar to you, it's not all about you, but I think Jesus lived a life of service to the Father and to people, and I think that's the key. Dr. Rick Risby, he has a quote from, I think it's a graduation speech he gives online that I think it's his father that told him, said, make sure your servant's towel is large and used. You know, a servant would often have a towel in biblical times and whatever, wrap it around themselves. And Jesus took his robe off and put a servant's towel around his waist and washed the disciples' feet. And I think that's where, Mr. Rigsby was going with that when he, his son, Dr. Rick Risby, shares that. Says, make sure your servant's towel is large and used. And I think when a person does that, when a man does that, there's fulfillment in it, but there's also, that road often leads to Jesus. So that would be my one piece of solid advice.
Yeah, so true. So true. Well, yeah, the greatest commandment and the second, it's not, neither of those are about me.
No, yeah, love
Right.
the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's so true.
So I got a Bible verse I stumbled across and I wanted to read
100%,
just to maybe to close our time, this time together.
Yeah, do it.
I was stumbling across this in reading the different books I've been reading the last few weeks. And it's 1 Corinthians 16, 13, and 14.
Okay.
And Paul is closing out the chapter with some general comments here and there, covering many topics as he winds down his letter to the 1 Corinthians. And verse 13 and 14 say this: be on the alert.
Mm-hmm.
Stand firm in the faith. Yeah. Act like men. Yeah. Be strong. Let all that you do be done in love. Yeah. And that is a great verse in my mind that summarizes biblical masculinity.
Amen. Agreed. Sweet. Good conversation.
Yeah, it was fun. I enjoyed that.
Till next time.
Till next time. Thanks for listening in. Take care.